Welcome to the Zachrilege cast. Karen Garst, third time's the charm.
Thank you so much for having me on.
It's like a really, there's a cyclical thing here. Like I had you on episode 66, 114, and now this is 162. So it's like every 45 episodes or so. And I don't know if that's enough, Karen Garst, but that's what we're at right now.
It's probably enough.
But we're together again because it's been not been a year since the last episode, but it's been, I guess, one MythCon since the last time we talked. And before we get started, I want to do a quote. Sometimes I do it out of context. This is not out of context. To hear these young men clap to feminism is a mental disease was really depressing. That was something you said during last year's chat. So you're here back for another MythCon. So at a high level, we can get into details in your own session as well. How was the 2018 edition compared to what it was like last year?
I thought it was much better. I thought it was better organized. I think what they were focusing on was people on YouTube. So almost everybody had a YouTube channel, was a regular contributor on social media. And I thought the topics, given that group, were pretty good. I mean, they talked about the atheist community and has it been fragmented. They talked about intersectionality. They talked about race. They talked about transgender. They talked about gender equality. So it was a really good set of panels, I thought.
Do you think it was pretty even-handed? I know last year there was a lot of talk about, guests coming in and out. And this year it seemed like even more so. They were trying really hard to get people on opposite sides, or at least enough to say they had like a token attempt.
Well, I know how hard it is to put a conference together. And I think, Sean and Brian, Dimitri and Fritz did a great job. They had people pull out at the last minute, probably not as much as last year. But it's hard to come back and substitute and get people. Now, of course, based on the comment I made last year about Thomas Smith and Sargon of Akkad saying, oh, great, we have two guys talking about feminism. I got a call this spring and, I'd have been a hypocrite to say, no, I won't do it. And I was pretty sure they were going to team me up with Karen Straughan. And then I just spent a ton of time researching it because most of my writing is atheism and women. Religion and women. It's not about gender equality per se, but I was glad I did it. And I think I may have spent more time on that than I did defending my dissertation. Just thinking.
Yeah, I know. Well, let me go ahead and ask. So this is the question that was your debate discussion, whatever they wanted to label it as. And I'll just ask you, have women achieved gender equality in the US?
Well, and I say no. Now, most people who would say no, they haven't, talk about things like reproductive rights, very legitimate, with what happened with Hobby Lobby, which got me started, which said that this privately held company, which of course we know is like a person because of Citizens United, doesn't have to provide certain forms of birth control. We hear the debate about the Kavanaugh appointment. Is that going to end Roe v. Wade? And the other thing that's usually discussed is pay equity. But as Karen Straughan herself said in a post, Karen Garst employed an ingenious strategy. She did a ton of research on what I talk about beforehand and diffused all my hostility right from the get-go. So what I did was take her issues, like women should register for selective service. Instead of arguing about that, I said, absolutely, yes, I agree. I think we're seen differently. And until we get that, we're not going to be seen the same. And then I talked about child custody. And I had read Warren Farrell's book, The Myth and Willpower, which really started out that men's rights activist. And kids need dads. They need dads and moms. So I think it kind of surprised her that I was using some of her arguments to say, hey, look, here's gender equality. It doesn't matter whether it's this or this. It's still an inequality. And I think what she does on her YouTube is say, well, men have it bad in this area. Well, okay, if they do, that's still an inequality. You can't say that women have achieved gender equality and men haven't, because what's equality? It means gender. Now, we did do just binary male, female, just to, not complicate it very much.
Yeah, I did just like watch the talk we had last year, and you mentioned that you would have been okay speaking at a men's rights activist conference and being like the only person against them, and then you get paired off with a men's rights activist female, which if you haven't spent 5 minutes in the skeptic community, that would shock you. But if you've noticed where people are finding the niche and going, ooh, I'm jumping in, it's not too surprising. So did you think you were kind of like surprised that she would have been surprised that you had prepared for her?
I don't know. That's really interesting. But, that audience was her audience. It's kind of Straughan's audience. 80% were, I would say, men under 35. But, I talked to them. I said, look, I've been married for 30 years. I have a 27-year-old son. Why would I be against male equality? That's ridiculous. So I think I set it on its end, if you will, but I truly believe that. I think what she does different than Warren Farrell said, look, he was on the board of the National Organization for Women. He said, don't put down women's activism in the past, getting the right to vote, the 60s, second wave feminism. He said, we need to talk about our rights without blaming it on women. And she blames it on feminists, just kind of like Straughan does, and it's all women's fault. And so I talked about, what you need to do. If you're in a custody battle, maybe you need to get an attorney. You want to fight for your children's rights and you want to fight for your place in it. So do that. I did also say, don't get married in your 20s. Much better if you wait, know who you are, and all of that kind of stuff. But I had a lot of young men come up to me afterwards and say, I didn't think I was going to agree with you. I like what you said.
Yeah, I think I wasn't going to agree with you part definitely was out there. But I like taking the fight, because I think if you asked a lot of the people attending the conference, maybe before it happened, of course, and a lot of stuff doesn't get absorbed. Like, your definition of feminism and theirs probably isn't the same. Like, I think the belief is that feminism equals female superiority. And as hard it is to consider total equality, that's still the goal. And the attempt to, I guess, call it something else, I can't remember what the term is people use in egalitarianism, because it can't say feminist, because that's what gender, is always a bad thing. But I don't know. So you did get kind of a better reaction than you thought you would, or maybe you didn't care that much about the individual person there?
No, I did. I thought, if I'm going to go there, I'm going to speak to these young men, because I knew what the audience would be. And I think the word feminism is out of date, because it's been so much maligned through social media, through people like Straughan and others. That's why I specifically stated, we're going to talk about gender equality. We're not going to talk about feminism. So I think I felt like, can I help these men understand what they may need to do in this new environment? Because culture always changes. It's difficult to adjust to changes. But just in my lifetime, my mother wanted to go to art school, and her father said, no, you're going to be a teacher. Okay, so absolutely you couldn't do anything else. My generation, it never occurred to me to do anything else. I could have been a teacher, a secretary, a nurse. those are the models I saw. Now, if I would have wanted to do something else, my parents would have been supportive. But you just see around you this culture and you don't see those models. It's not like little boy who sees President Obama saying, oh, here's a black guy, I'm black, maybe I could be president. Today, I think women just about in every field can see the model of what they might want to be. I think the trails have been blazed. I'm not saying it's easy if you want to go into software engineering, but you can do it. There's a lot of support for STEM. We have women astronauts. Half the law schools are women now, and half the, I know pharmacy, more than half the pharmacy schools are filled with women. So I think that's changed. But the other hand is we haven't a lot of men who are elementary school teachers. We don't have a lot of men who are nurses. So, you know, it's got to change the other way too.
Well, for you, I know for me, I can take it personally when the term atheist is such a negative term. Just people hear it and it's bad. How do you feel about the way feminists, just maybe the term itself is treated, and how do you kind of sidestep it? I think you've probably already answered that, but you know,
well,
in terms of
if I go down,
about how it affects you personally, maybe.
Certainly, if I ask my friends, or even if you ask young people, what does feminism mean to you? And they'll kind of go, oh, equal rights for women. They would never say superiority for women. And the problem is when you get people on social media, number one, that's a niche. That's not all people. And certainly social media has kind of taken over, whether you're talking about news, discussion, etc. It's very prominent. Obviously, I didn't grow up with any of that. So I think that we should just say gender equality. What do we need to do to have gender equality?
Yeah, I guess that another term doesn't really make a lot of difference. Now, you mentioned this earlier, and you're just too good. You like jump ahead 7 questions on what I have, but
I'm reading your mind.
Was there not tough? Was there any I don't know question about you going, or because last year after the fact you're kind of like, well, I need to see who's there, because last year you'd gotten, you know, free VIP tickets because you helped promote, and this year was it as soon as they said, hey, we want you to, and was it them reaching out to you saying, hey, we want you to talk? You were like, okay.
I felt that it would, given my comment that I made last year, it would be hypocritical for me to say no. If I'm going to challenge somebody and say, I think that was poorly done, and I think we need women talking, and if I as a woman am not going to step up, that's being a hypocrite. So I felt I had to say yes. Now, I didn't know at the time what the rest of it was. And yes, I got some pushback. Some of my subscribers says, what are you going for? And I had a couple of people, say you shouldn't be doing this, etc. But I felt, do you want to talk to the choir, or you want to talk to people who maybe you need to move a little bit? I've done almost all my work within the secular community, conventions, conferences, podcasts, etc. I would really like to break out. Now, as an example, I wrote our local newspaper, and I live in a small town in Oregon. The newspaper covers 3 or 4. One of them is Mount Angel, which has an abbey. All right. So a little religious. And I said, I know you're real conservative, but would you like to talk, interview with a local author? And I told her what I did, etc. And they interviewed me, and it was in the paper. And frankly, that's the first non-atheist press I've been in. And then I serve, I just help out a little couple hours on Wednesday nights with a community dinner that's held at a church. And so right after the article came out, I went, and one of the guys said, so are you the person in the article? I said, yep. And he says, so you're an atheist. And then he came over to me later, like, I'm sure he's never met an atheist. And so, well, so you're an atheist. Tell me about that. And so it really opened a dialogue that nobody would have known about that. And I had a book signing because I thought, well, it's free publicity. And I had 8 people show up I didn't know at book signing at a little town in Silverton, Oregon. So, and I also sell my books to the local bookstore. And last week I got a call, they were out, and gave them 4, and somebody bought all 4 of them. And now I'm going to give them some more. So I just wish I could get out of the secular community more to be able to talk to people who are on the edge or kind of still believe, so I could talk to those people. But I haven't been real successful at that. I did send my second book, Women versus Religion, The Case Against Faith and for Freedom, to the New York Times, and several of those, my publisher told me it was a waste of time, but I had to try, and of course I never heard from any of them. Oh, well.
Well, I guess as someone who kept and probably still keeps a list of all atheist podcasts, then it would make sense. Yeah, what other opportunities are there to get out there and talk? And I don't know, I feel a bit of cynicism from the Mythicist Milwaukee people, but at the same time, this is a rare opportunity for people who disagree to talk. And it did sound like what you attempted to do was better than the typical debate. Typical debate is people yelling pre-thought out concepts at each other and not actually addressing the other person's points.
Yes. And
it sounds like you actually took the initiative and said, all right, I'm going to set the stage and say, we're going to talk about some stuff that maybe my opponent or other debate person. Now, were you able to talk to Karen? And it's, interesting that we had 2 Karens. Did you get to talk to her before or after?
We talked at the event, and Melissa Chen was our moderator. And I told Melissa, I said, there's only one thing I care about. I can't have somebody talk over me. If I've talked too long, tell me, I will stop. But I'm not going to be in a debate where people, because you can't hear it, you can't understand it. And she said that she had heard that when we were on the conference call with the coordinators for the conference, they said, well, what are we going to call you guys? You're both Karens. And Karen Straughan says, I want to be evil Karen. She can be good Karen. So Melissa asked me, and I said, sure, it's okay. She made me a little halo for on top of my head, and she made a little set of devil ears for Karen Straughan.
Oh, yeah. So I remember seeing the picture, and I saw devil ears. I'm like, why is she wearing? Okay.
Yeah, and then toward the end of the debate, I went over and gave her the halo and took the devil ears. So, but Melissa, really, she did an intro, and she was done. We were very polite to each other. It was really easy to talk with Karen. I raised my points, and then she raised it. But I think she was a little taken aback because she expected me to be the traditional feminist, which is, men get more pay, men do this, men do that. But I had watched a lot of her videos, and there are areas where men are disadvantaged. They have the jobs that have the highest risk, safety-wise. I mean, if you're on top of a roof and you're a construction worker, that is more dangerous than being a secretary, right? I don't know about teachers these days because that seems to be getting more and more dangerous to do that as well. So like I said, I'm married, I have a son, I care about men's rights, but, certainly on the other hand, you got to admit that 8 men owned 50% of the wealth in the entire world. So not exactly equal. However, I think we have a lot of mechanisms in place to be able to pick the job you want to do, to be successful, and to get paid the same as men. I've had an instance where I wasn't paid the same as a man. I challenged it. They agreed with me. I got the raise. You've got to step up and be able to do that. One of the things that I said to the group that I got some applause from was, let's support the Equal Rights Amendment. And I read it out loud, and they agreed. Let's work on that together. Let's do something positive rather than, arguing with each other. That doesn't get you anywhere. I did say I was going to mention the Richard Carrier and Sargon of Akkad debate. Obviously, you've heard there was a bomb threat. So we had an hour gap. We had to leave the building.
Yeah, did that happen? So it was in the middle of the conference?
It's about 1 o'clock or so, 1 or 2. And I just went out and had lunch.
Had you already done your session, or?
I did, and I was so thankful. I would have been.
I was wondering, in terms of the timing, like when did it start, and then when did you get to be on stage? And did you want to be early in the day?
Yes, I did, and I was the second panel, and it worked great. I know if that bomb threat would have come, and I wouldn't have been able to do mine, I would have been upset because I just spent so much time about it and so much time thinking about it. How would I respond if she says this, etc. But at the very last panel was Richard Carrier and Straughan of Akkad. Now, if anyone wants to get on Twitter, they will find out what Richard Carrier did, which is he put up a post on his blog that none of his girlfriends could come. Would anyone like to come? And there was a lot of criticism about that. And I was named there. I think maybe Christy Winter started it. So I got all these mentions in Twitter, etc. And I finally said, it's just not classy. You couldn't go one weekend just by yourself without having to solicit sex, So that was kind of tacky, but hey, it is what it is. And then he and Straughan had a moderator, one of the donors. I'm not going to remember his last name. Maybe it's Mario, maybe it's Jacobson or something like that. He's
behind Mythicist Milwaukee, and he also decided to help Richard Carrier's lawsuit, which is a different subject, but yeah.
Yeah, and he didn't
exactly. I don't even know if neutral is correct because I think he probably supports both of the people who talked in that.
Well, he didn't intervene, and so at the beginning, I only stayed there for 10 minutes because I absolutely can't stand people talking against each other. But he interrupted Richard. He told Richard to shut up, and he has since apologized. He got on his YouTube channel and did apologize, but he was like a bully, and I think Mythicist Milwaukee wanted different viewpoints. They did these panels about, has a political climate divided the atheist community? There were different views. They talked about atheism plus. They talked about, is atheism dead? And Jacqueline Glenn says, no, it's not dead. I've actually come back to do more shows about atheism. And that was an interesting discussion. There were opposing points of view. So I feel like every panel was really... nobody was really mocking anybody like last year happened. I think they were more respectful. A lot of people were going in and out, which is kind of disruptive, but there were a lot of questions. There were a lot of good questions, but then it came to Carrier and Straughan, and I just knew it was going to be a shouting match. So I left.
Yeah, I can see the appeal to Carl, and I can only call him Carl because I just can't take the name seriously. But it seems like just based on the performance last year and this year, he just doesn't seem to do well in a live setting. Like he was not, whatever he and Richard Carrier were supposed to discuss, he was not on there. And just attacking people. Like I think attacking people can work in a YouTube setting because it's just you. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, you can do interactions as we are doing, but for most part, a lot of YouTube videos are just the one person spouting their views. But I don't think it works so well live. And for as much as it probably draws in a certain audience, I always feel like there's got to be a better example.
Well, I have a lot of respect
whatever he believes in.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for Karen Straughan. She doesn't do a lot of debates. She's done several in Canada, I think, more than I have certainly, but she does her research. She presents her views, and she was incredibly polite at this event. I mean, literally, Melissa said two things, and she was, she didn't need to intervene once during our debate because we both respected each other. And I think the audience got different viewpoints. And if that's what you want to do and have a debate about different points of view, then you can't have somebody like Carl being a bully. And he was just like he was last year. He was a bully. So he's he's young, he's 39. He's going to have to learn if he gets invited to another debate to change his ways. I mean, I would really like to debate him on gender equality. Let's have at it. Let's do what Karen and I did. But I'm not going to sit up there and have him tell me to shut up. Excuse me. That's not going to happen. So we'll see. It was kind of funny because I went to the airport in Milwaukee to fly home, and he was at the same restaurant I went to. The one person I probably didn't want to talk to. But anyway, I guess
you didn't share a table, huh?
No.
Well, last year, that was the quote I had at the beginning. He said that feminism was a mental illness. And then this year, and this was parroted by followers on some YouTube videos I checked out, that he wouldn't hire a feminist. And I was thinking, does he hire anybody? He has his own YouTube channel, right? And he works for like a white nationalist, political party that's kind of out of favor in England.
Yes.
So it doesn't even really, there's no like practical aspect to any of this. But will it ever turn in like feminism's favor, all these attacks, or does it not really matter? It's like people want to be anti and they're just going to be that way.
Well, again, it's a process of educating people. We've had thousands of years of patriarchy. And if anyone wants to say there was never a patriarchy, they haven't read the Bible. I mean, there's no better evidence of what the atmosphere was like when you go from a goddess to a god who's male, and you take all the symbols for the goddess, the snake, because of rejuvenation and cycles, the tree, because they were often worshipped in nature, and the woman, Eve, and you turn it all on its head. And women now is the cause of original sin, etc. So I don't think there's any better evidence that men were in charge than the Bible. And yes, it is changing. Women have in the United States, have a lot more autonomy today than they did, my goodness, even 50 years ago. So we can go toward equality. We can deal with issues that men raise. We can deal with issues that women raise. Let's move forward. I did also say at the conference, I had drafted the 10 commandments of gender equality. And I read a couple of them and I got, applause. And I said, that's my blog post for the week. I didn't really raise it much in the conference, but I would be surprised if any man couldn't agree with those 10 commandments. I would be very surprised because it deals with gender fairly, evenly. If he has to do selective service, we have to do selective service. Now, there are things, it's obviously sexual dimorphism. We're different. Would they ever taken me in combat at 18, weighing 90 pounds? No, I don't think so. But that doesn't mean I couldn't have done something else. I can still be a patriot. I can still contribute. But men are stronger by and large. Now, there's certainly women who are stronger than certain men, but by and large, we do have differences.
Well, talking about moving forward, we have a current debate in our country about a Supreme Court nominee. Roe versus Wade, 72, 73?
73.
So we're talking 45 years. Hey, I did math on live air. We're not moving forward on that. It seems like there's a really concerted effort that people have ignored for like 30 years to set up a system where a lot of federal judges are right-wing. All this talk about like left-wing activist judges, I mean, like Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are very activist right-wing judges as far as I'm concerned. Is there a way to get past this, or do you think it's just something that every generation has to do? We have to just continue these fights. Like, it's not determined. It could go either way, definitely at this point.
Well, I think religion is one of the excuses that's used to be opposed to abortion, and particularly evangelicals. But that's not the way it worked out. It was really a political issue. It was a way for the Republican Party to pull the Catholics away from the Democratic Party. Roe v. Wade, the Civil Rights Act, etc., turned the South from blue to red. And they saw it was successful. I read this article once where it said, oh, God, I can't remember his name now. But it was the moral majority guy. What's his name? Anyway, it said he wouldn't have known how to spell the word abortion. I mean, it wasn't on anyone's radar screen. And it's interesting to see what happened in the 19th century. The Catholic Church allowed abortion up until quickening, which is about 26 weeks. It's where you feel the fetus inside you. They approved that. And a lot of the people who were abortionists were women, like midwives. Well, the American Medical Association comes along and says, we got to get the women out of the business. So they take this stand against abortion. Then you get to the economic collapse in the 20s and 30s, and they're more flexible about it because nobody can afford to raise a kid, that kind of thing. And then you get to past World War II, and we want women to stay home and have children. So now we're more against abortion. But it was a political issue to divide Democrats and Republicans. And I don't know if we're ever going to be done with it until we've got 40% of Americans say they're nuns, that they don't believe in religion, and that cannot be used as a wedge strategy, which is actually what they call it. They call it the wedge strategy. There will always be abortions. The question is whether they're going to be safe and legal, accessible or not. And I have been a member of the National Abortion Rights Action League for 40 years. I've been paying them dues. Will I ever get to the point where I don't have to? I don't know.
Yeah, it doesn't seem likely.
No, it doesn't seem likely.
It always is interesting because the terms people use are important. And I have a friend who's anti-abortion, and she always talks about the choice she made to have a child. And I'm like, don't you want other people to have that choice? No. There's definitely a limit of freedom. But we can talk about, so the secular movement is a relatively small movement, and you're like, hey, you know what I should do? I should get into another growing industry. You have published a sequel to Women Beyond Belief, Women v. Religion is the term. So when you did the first book, did you think, oh, I'm definitely going to do a second one? And then what was the process like to go, okay, I need to find some writers, and there are still plenty of stories to be told?
Well, the first book, I started to reach out to friends. And then I decided to limit it to women. And then I reached out in social media, so I had more of a variety. In order to market the book, I was on podcasts. I went to it's a Women's Secular Coalition or something like that, and met a number of these people, authors, and some I had read their books. Some of the people had blurbed my first book. But I wanted the second book to be less about personal stories than telling us about the subjugation of women through religion. So Valerie Tirico did an amazing job. Her essay is titled Chattel. It's all about how women were treated in religion all the way through. Candace Gorham used to be, I think, a Baptist minister, and she's a mental health counselor. And she talked about when you grow up in an atmosphere that's very religious, it can be very punitive and can shape you for life. And that impact. Alexis Record talks about being raised in this accelerated Christian education, which is neither education nor accelerated.
Yeah, I was wondering about the word accelerated there.
Yeah, it was really funny. So then I had two women who were African-American, Deanna Adams and Valerie Wade, and they talked about pre-slavery, after slavery, and they had goddesses and queens in Africa, which I didn't know about it. And then I had two Hispanic authors, one who is Marcia Garcia and Hypatia Alexandria, and they talked about, when you're raised in a very pro-Hispanic Catholic community, you're not supposed to seek an education. You're supposed to get married right away, and you're supposed to have lots of kids. Well, how does that disadvantage women? Well, they don't get the education to be able to do something else, et cetera, et cetera. And then I even had Greta Vosper, who's an atheist minister in Canada, write one. Abby Hafer wrote about biology, and it's a hoot. It's the funniest essay in the book. And then Kaylee Whalen, who I met at the Secular Conference for Women, is transgender. So it's really, I don't want to say academic because it's not academic, but it's very well researched. And I have been trying for probably 6 months to push this book to women's studies programs. And I have not been very successful. And I don't see how you can study gender without studying religion. But I'm going to keep trying.
Well, if No Illusions Diatribes Volume 2 can be in Marissa's in a graduate program, and that's one of the books, I feel like you can make it in. Now, how important is it to get, of course, you say, only female authors, and, maybe there's some pushback there, but give me break, dudes. You've been in charge forever. But getting a diverse cast of authors within, female experience, is it tougher to do, and how rewarding is it to hear these kind of stories of experiences that are different than yours?
Well, I think these people were very knowledgeable about the subject they wrote about. So it's very interesting. I learned a great deal. We're working on an audiobook, and we're having everybody but Aruna Pap couldn't read hers. She has some family issues, but everyone else agreed to record their own essay, which I think is going to be really cool. And they're going to put out an audiobook of it. It's just so many different perspectives to see how women are affected. And in terms of having only women write in the book, if you take the 100 bestsellers on atheism on Amazon, there's only 5 women. The 95 are men. So it's kind of our turn. And I don't want to be a victim. If I want more women writers, then I need to do something about it. If I want more women speaking out on atheism, I need to speak out on atheism. So I think it's timely. And I'm going to talk to No Illusions about where he got his book in.
Yeah, exactly.
What was your trick? How'd you do that?
Well, are you already considering a trilogy?
No, I'm done. I'm done.
You're done?
That. Yeah. Well, I am 68. So I've been retired for 10 years. I spent 5 years writing my genealogy for my son, both sides. And then I got into this in 2014. And I'll probably continue my blog. I enjoy that. Once a week, I get an email from somebody who says, I really enjoy your writing. I appreciate your courage. It's hard to stop. Plus, I have a lot of women who write for me. And then I just have to do the mechanics. And I love guest writers. Contact me at faithlessfeminist.com. But I don't think I'm going to write another book. It's expensive. I had both books professionally edited, not by the publisher, but by me, because I went with Pitchstone Publishing. It's a small press. They do a lot of atheism stuff, but they don't do any marketing. And I had to pay for the editing, but my mother was an English teacher, so I couldn't have any mistakes in it. So I don't want to spend any more money on it. If the book started taking off, and maybe I would, but probably not.
Yeah, that's the underrated aspect of modern book publicity, is that the author pretty much has to do it or has to invest in it.
Yes.
And that takes a lot of effort. Yeah, seriously. So you say you've been retired for a decade. Are you going to take it easy at any point? Or you just, this is what retirement's like for you?
Well, I always have to have a project. And so in this little town in Silverton, beautiful town, it's got the Oregon Gardens, got murals all over the walls downtown. I am in a group called Silverton Progressives, Progressive Democrats. We work on campaigns. I'm a precinct person. I'm the president of our homeowners association, and I'm treasurer of the Pudding River Watershed Council that I serve on with my husband. So it's not like even if I stopped everything else, I wouldn't be busy. And now I'm working on with a gentleman who's much more knowledgeable on the subject, but we're approaching the city of Silverton to go fossil free. So we developed an energy plan. We basically plagiarized it from another city. They said we could. It's great. It's not college anymore. And we're working on that. So it's not as if I'm sitting home reading books.
Is that similar to the plan that California has, I think, to go it's clean energy by like 2040, which isn't that far in the future?
It's electrical vehicles. It's good planting of native plants, dealing with water issues. Most of our energy in Oregon comes from out of state. So whether you agree with climate change or not, do we want to be resilient? Do we want to be sustainable? Yes, we do. I mean, the amount of energy you can save by just doing these new lights, these LED lights, it's amazing. Some city gave 30,000 light bulbs away because it would just save on energy. So we're working on it. It's a pretty small town, and we'll have to find funding for it. And we're going to go around to all the groups and the businesses and try to get their support. But it's a new area for me, so it's interesting.
Yeah, that's the argument that I guess people don't make often about clean energy. It's like, if this can save money. I mean, it's not just, hey, let's be hippies. It's like, yeah, this actually has a potential benefit, which people don't always get, kind of like gender equality, right?
There you go. Just kind of like that.
Just kind of like it.
But so I just wanted to say, even though I've kind of been critical of the Straughan and Richard Carrier debate, I think the organizers did a really good job. I think they listened last year, and I totally understand that you just can't do a conference every year about atheism. It just, people will stop coming. So they needed to reach out to a kind of a broader set of issues, and intersectionality, identity politics, all of those things are relevant to particularly YouTubers. What's the political climate like? It was a very interesting conference.
Yeah, I do think, I know initially this podcast was all about kind of atheism and talking about people's journeys out of religion. And then it's like, oh, it's been 2 months and I don't think we've talked about religion on a show. But of course it does happen. I think you have to kind of reinvent yourself. Although I kind of wonder where the whole Jesus mythicism thing went, because that was like one of their big things and they just kind of dropped it. But they definitely went a different direction.
Yes. But I would really encourage people. They're going to post it on YouTube in a week or so, and you can pick and choose which one you want to listen to. And the thing is, for people who are media savvy, they understand all these words. A lot of other people don't. If I asked somebody what an MRA was, they wouldn't know. If I asked them what an SJW was, they wouldn't know. If you're not on social media and you're not watching podcasts and YouTube, those are not words that appear very often in the newspaper. They had an interesting workshop on, is traditional media going by the wayside? And certainly they were talking about, I believe it was a newspaper, I'm not positive, but gained a lot of its income from renting out part of its building because they were laying off people. And the size of the newspapers are smaller. The problem is there's an integrity in major media about research, finding sources, and telling factual information. And on social media, anyone can say something and there's it can be so distorted. And I think that's one of the problems.
Yeah, if anyone ever wants to check out a movie, Network from the 1970s, it kind of predicts news is not just about the truth, it's about a financial decision. And it kind of predicts reality TV, which has led to our current situation. I think we're at the good part of the evening. First of all, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about tonight?
No.
Because we will do the promotion part in a second.
Really good. And I don't forget about my joke.
I know that's what we were going to get to. So you have a joke, so I will be quiet and let you say it.
Well, this is a joke. I was never much on, I don't remember actors' names. I was never good about remembering jokes. So in junior high, I had this joke. Like if somebody said, I'm going to do something unless you tell a joke, I had one, right? So consider the time period. How do you know when an elephant has her period?
How do you know?
Your mattress is gone and there's a nickel on the box spring.
Wow. Okay, that's a throwback.
That's a bit of a throwback, yeah. Anyway, that's my joke for the day. That's my joke.
Well, I do want to say, and maybe I'll just talk about this longer in my live read portion. I think it takes all people, like all types in the community. I'm glad that there were people who wanted to go to MythCon because it definitely had this feeling of being a center-lord, edgelord, whatever kind of conference, only one-sided. But I'm glad you were there to just be a strong voice for feminism. And that's, all I want to say about that part.
Well, I felt very respected. I didn't feel, I thought the questions were good. I thought the feedback from the audience was good. I had a lot of people afterwards said, I think I may have mentioned this earlier, gee, I wasn't going to agree with everything, anything you said. My friend and I kind of got lost going back to the hotel, and these couple guys helped us. So I bought them a drink, and they were VIPs with the group. And we were talking about abortion rights. And one guy said, well, I just don't want my federal dollars going to abortion. He said through Planned Parenthood. I said, well, Planned Parenthood gets no federal money for the abortion process that they do. And he just oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So getting
That's
in front of an
amazing.
audience that disagrees with you and educating them, I was honored to be there.
And tell people where they can find you and check out your writing online. And of course, the latest book.
Okay, the latest book was Women v. Religion, The Case Against Faith and for Freedom. It is available in Kindle or paperback, audio coming out probably in a month or two. And my blog is www.faithlessfeminist.com. My YouTube channel, which I only put up on YouTube something that gets recorded somewhere else, but I have a very interesting presentation I do, and they filmed it in Tucson when I was there. It's called From Goddess to God, Elimination of the Feminine Divine. If you want to know what a woman feels about what happened when we got monotheism, watch that. It's about 40 minutes. And that's about it.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Karen, for being on for the third time. And I know there'll be a MythCon next year. And if they bring you on again, well, come back on and we can talk about it.
Well, thank you. You're my hero. Nobody else has had me on 3 times.
Well, they're just missing out, you know? There's more out there, but thank you again for being on.
Thank you.